Welcome back, my beautiful friends. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Welcome back to Hello Open Metaverse, brought to us by Animoca Brands. Today, we're featuring Alan Lau, Chief Business Officer at Animoca Brands. Interestingly enough, outside of his tech work, Alan contributes actively to arts development. He is chairman of Parasite, the longest standing nonprofit art space in Hong Kong. He also co-chairs the Asia Pacific Acquisition Committee of Tate and the Asia Art Circle of Guggenheim to help the two institutions build a global art collection. Today, Alan is joined by my good friend, Amy Madison, a partner at Digital. Digital is a metaverse and gaming fund backed by Steve Cohen. Amy tends to operate at the intersection of entertainment, crypto, and law. And over the past few years, Amy spearheaded the creation of most of the processes and protocols governing the stablecoin and its network. Today, Alan will be chatting about art in the metaverse, the new immersive experience redefining galleries, while Amy will cover what laws and regulations will apply for those involved, exploring if we can govern the ungovernable for a safe Hello Open Metaverse. During the last decade, virtual intersections have become an increasingly important part of life for consumers and businesses. Discussing the metaverse today in 2022 may feel a little bit like discussing the internet in the 1960s. To be viable as a place to live and do business, the metaverse will need real-world controls to protect users from abuse, fraud, and loss. Regulation takes time and is difficult to apply globally, but the builders of the metaverse can take proactive steps to create their own metacode of conduct. If the metaverse is to be truly viable, regulators and the architects of these virtual spaces should be working now to ensure the safety of its users. And here to chat some more are my experts at hand. Welcome to the show, superstars.
Thank you. It's always
Thank
a
you.
pleasure
Thank
to
you
be
for having
here.
us.
Absolutely. Alan, I'm going to start with you. Let's chat art moving into the metaverse. So the prestigious auction house Sotheby's opened its first metaverse branch back in June of 2021 after having tremendous success selling NFTs or digital tokenization on the blockchain network. And Sotheby's sees the metaverse as the next frontier for digital art, and they're not the only ones, Alan. More than a dozen metaverse museums and galleries have sprung up since the NFT frenzy began in its earnest back in 2021. How will the metaverse museums add value? Talk to me about some of the ways art can be created, showcased, and collected in a metaverse gallery setting versus the traditional one.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I think it all started in some part due to COVID, right? Because the museums are shut for the good part of 2020 and 21. All the museums have been pushed to think about what is the digital strategy. Of course, a lot of things have moved online, but also there are new formats in which art has been created, and that comes the NFT Summit in 2021. So, I think a lot of museums are actually having an outpost in different metaverses, for example, in Sandbox. So for anyone that's actually walked into Sandbox, you'll see that, when you walk in the main hall, there's almost like an NFT Hall of Fame where you can see the most famous PFP project. And quite a number of other traditional museums, like the British Museum, have also created NFTs and try to put it into the metaverse as well. So I think it's just a new way, driven in part by COVID, but I think it's also the broader trend where this is the new avenue and channel for people to experience art.
This is definitely the broader trend, and which brings me into Amy. It takes time for regulation to catch up with technological innovation, which means that currently there is a lack of supervision, Amy, over the metaverse. And this concerns me on a number of fronts. First, the currencies we exchange in virtual worlds are not real money in the traditional sense. They're either cryptocurrencies or in-game currencies like Fortnite, V-Bucks. There may be accounts or wallets to store these assets in, but there's no government-backed protection from loss or fraud. What do you say to this, and how can artists and investors protect themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think to answer that and break it down into three parts, right? One, what do regulators actually care about? Two, how can companies protect themselves? And then three, to your point, how can artists, individuals that are actually utilizing these platforms protect themselves? And so if we step back a little bit, right? Regulators care about the movement of money and substitutes of money. And what does that mean? Well, it depends on what day and age you're in. Back in the day, seashells were used as money, at a certain time, precious metals. Today, we're seeing more and more vendors accept things like Bitcoin. Companies like Gucci and Tag are accepting ApeCoin, right? And so can tokens be substitutes of money? Sure. Can NFTs be substitutes of money? Sure. Regulators care about the movement of value because they care about stopping things like terrorism financing, money laundering, and whatever form that value comes in, they regulate that. And so what does that mean for companies, right? Companies that are building in the space like Sandbox, like Alan mentioned, or protocols or marketplaces. Well, if you're a company and you're interacting with money or substitutes of money, in often cases, certain tokens and NFTs even possibly, and moving it around from person to person or place to place, you're going to need to be licensed and you're going to need to be registered in certain jurisdictions, and or you're going to have to work with a licensed or registered provider, right? That also means that you're going to have to conduct AML KYC checks because the regulators are going to want to know who you're moving money to and where you're moving money to so they can track that. And the consequences of non-compliance can range from fines to shutting down your platform to, in the case of OFAC non-compliance, it could be really serious criminal charges and even jail time. So it's important for companies to at least be aware of, hey, money laundering, terrorism financing, movement of money is an issue and it's regulated. And then for individuals, I mean, it's very difficult, to be honest, especially in this day and age where many of the protocols that they use are probably run by anonymous founders, right? It's not easy. It's not always easy to do. Even if you try to do additional research, you can't really find the jurisdiction that the company, the DAO, or if it's even registered in, right? Do they have licenses? We don't know. What third parties are they working with? As you said, there's no government backing or stop loss protection from these DeFi protocols.
Got it. So it seems like, what it sounds like, what I'm hearing is unless regulation of the metaverse is global in its reach, there may be really little to stop an offshore-based investment vehicle running its own corner of the metaverse and people accessing it from other virtual worlds. So you're right. This is extremely important to start to implement now. Alan, for centuries, art museums have fulfilled their mission in pretty much the same way: collect and curate work in a fixed space under a donor-based system. So I ask, and I ask this often, what is the role of a museum in society today when culture is moving so fast that they really can't respond to what is interesting to the youth, to this generation? And NFTs like CryptoPunks might not have a place in the traditional art world, but they definitely can live in the metaverse where they can be admired by an avid digital collector, by a huge group of people that appreciate that type of art. What do you say to this? And in your opinion, will the digital natives like our Gen Zers and Gen Alpha respond positively to this?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, I had the privilege to be supporting and affiliated with a couple of museums, and plus in Hong Kong is one that I'm the vice chair of. So I had the chance to look into the curatorial process. So I would have thought, because when you walk in the museum, you still see the same paintings, right? You still see installation. You don't really see NFT art, which I think is a really important medium, right? But what really goes behind the scene is actually museum curators do research into the latest trend, right? So for example, in M+, and also in Guggenheim, because I also supported that team, is they've been studying NFT in a lot of detail. But the way they look at it is not just to look at the latest PFP project and to look at the way they set it up, but also to put it into a historical reference, right? To think about when digital art started. And it really started, you can draw it back to Namjoon Paik in the 60s, right? And of course, Mona Vera have actually been doing generative art and female artists in the 60s, right? So if you go all the way back, using printers, right, at that time. So, what they try to do is they take a very academic approach to say, where does NFT come from? It didn't come from nowhere, right? So it came from the advent and invention of computers and artists using that as a medium to create. And that's why you have Namjoon Paik using TV, you have Mona Vera who using printer to do generative art. And then you can say there are people that's using digital, that are using VR, and now is NFT, right? So I think museums are actually doing very interesting research in this area. And as with museum, having worked with them for so many years, it does take 5 years at a minimum for them to come up with a show, right? So, I think give them a couple of years. I think very soon you'll be seeing shows where NFT is part of the storytelling, because I think it is a very important milestone of digital art.
It's extremely, extremely important. And so now that we're entering in this phase of of course, storytelling is extremely important, this safe ecosystem that we are creating to make all of this viable. But Amy, to make any financial regulation viable in the metaverse, there needs to be these strong links between virtual and real life personas and adherence to many of the same principles that make the real financial world safe. You mentioned it earlier, know your customer, the KYC requirements, tax laws, risk management methodologies, and so on will all have their place in virtual reality as it evolves. You have about a minute to answer this, or a minute and a half, but how do brands and DAOs go about KYC and AML in such an anonymous environment? Feels like an oxymoron.
Yeah, I mean, you asked $1 million question, right? And the answer to that is a lot of times they don't. Financial institutions that are regulators serve as the on and off ramps right now. So that's where the KYC points are when you want to flip from crypto to fiat. But the in-between hops, when you're going from anonymous wallet to anonymous wallet and joining a DAO, oftentimes there's no KYC there. And that's why obviously the regulators are concerned, and I can see that. But in a sense, that's how it happens in the real world, right? When I go to my bank, JP Morgan, they know who I am. But when I take my $100 out and take $5 to go buy a lollipop, give $5 to another street performer, give $20 to my friend, nobody is tracking or monitoring or reporting those transactions. I think the dangers with everything online, everything going in the blockchain, and everything payments being so seamlessly crossing borders is that everything's faster, easier, cheaper, at a larger frequency and in larger amounts, which also applies to, of course, bad actors. I think that smarter people that are working on, privacy blockchains, digital identity, passporting, they're working on these solutions, which have to exist, right, in order for this to move forward.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Alan, interestingly enough, though, when the digital artist known as Beeple sold his Everyday's piece for $69.3 million in March of 2021, the discussion around NFT art was catapulted from relatively obscurity into the mainstream. And by the end of the year, total sales of digital art minted on Ethereum had swelled to really exceed more than $42 billion, according to a report by Chainalysis. And how the value of digital collectibles minted on other blockchains been included in that figure, the total value of the NFT art market may have equaled the traditional art sector, which ranked in around $50 billion in the same year. How is the metaverse really enabling artists? You have about 2 minutes to answer this. What opportunities can the metaverse offer to creators in Asia, but also around the world, that they may not have access to otherwise?
I think metaverse create a lot more artistic freedom because you're not bounded by medium and production costs, right? So if you want to do an installation that literally defy gravity, you can do that in the metaverse, right? Especially in the Asian context, actually a lot of Asian artists, if you look at the work that they produce, a lot of it are paintings and smaller works. And the reason is no one had big studios. Spaces are such a premium. It's so expensive in Asia, right? So that is a big contrast if you compare like Asia to the Western world. I think in metaverse, maybe this is where artists from Asia could innovate, right? And you might have seen that there's been a lot of creation from architectural practice, from design, and certainly from visual arts, where people are creating in the metaverse. And I think because there's a little bit less physics and gravity, I think I think you could free up artistic imagination. So I think that's how metaverse can make a difference to artists.
Yes, of course. It could also pave the way out of poverty for some, really allowing them to access lucrative new opportunities via this distributed global audience, while bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of the commercial art world, to build, like you said, a direct relationship with their collectors instead. And additionally, the ability to mint their creations as NFTs has now provided this unprecedented digital property rights to artists, to Amy's point, with blockchain-enabled smart contracts, enabling them to collect a pre-programmed and automated royalty on all future sales of the work via these secondary markets. It's absolutely brilliant and fabulous. That's why this ties in very nicely together. And that's why I wanted to have Amy and both you on, because there's such a nice synergy. It's like a fine dance that the two worlds have to make in order for this to all regulate nicely. We are out of time, but I wanted to thank Amy and Alan. It's such a pleasure chatting with you. You guys are true experts, and you have simplified this in the best way possible for our audience. So I thank you.
Thanks for having us.
That was our Hello Open Metaverse segment, brought to us by Animoca Brands, and that was the awesome Alan Lau, Chief Business Officer of Animoca Brands. Head to animocabrands.com to get involved in all the action. And that was the awesome Amy Madison. Check her out, amymadison.xyz, and she's on the gram everywhere on Twitter @_Amy Madison. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. We'll be right back after this.
A Moment of Zen is brought to you by Animoca Brands. As a worldwide industry leader in digital, entertainment, blockchain, gamifications, and digital property rights, Animoca Brands plays a key role in the future growth of the metaverse. Ranked by the Financial Times as a high-growth company, Animoca Brands creates a new asset class, GameFi economies, and a more equitable digital framework contributing to the building of the open metaverse. For more information and to become part of the excitement, go to animocabrands.com. That's animocabrands.com.
Welcome back, my beautiful friends. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. Welcome back to Hello Open Metaverse, brought to you by Animoca Brands, where we're chatting with the awesome Amy and Alan. Welcome back, guys.
Thanks, Zen.
All right, Amy, let's pick this one back up with you. So regulations take years to develop. So as responsible businesses, whether owners, investors, or advertisers in the metaverse, you need to develop and follow a simple set of principles right now. And everybody wants to know what those principles are because they're entering the Web 3.0 space. So what are your top 3 metaverse principle must-haves?
That's a hard question. I don't know there are any all-encompassing things, but the 3 tips I would say are, 1, you should know what the big legal issues affecting your company and industry are. And that's easier said than done, right? For example, if you're building a blockchain game, you should know that money transmission, securities law, and IP are 3 very big topics. What does that mean? Well, there's all sorts of free resources on the internet. I've written over 100 pages on this, which you can be found at amymadison.xyz. So be aware of what the issues are. 2, and oftentimes they're not self-explanatory. 2, I think that even if you're just a new company starting off, and you can't afford a full-time lawyer in-house, and you can't afford like a big law lawyer, you should at least try to do an audit, allocate a couple of hours for someone to take your post-mortem on your company's operations right now to identify the big red flags. And then 3, this can probably be applied to many things in life, but if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
I love it. It's true. But if you sum it up just like that, you're right. Because a lot of these things they sound too good to be true. And they're preying on a lot of innocent people and people wanting to jump on the bandwagon and fear of missing out, FOMO, what we call. And as we just recently saw, Kim Kardashian got sued. And we have a lot of things that are happening. NFT shilling is trending right now. People are getting sued. So you are going to be in very high demand, my darling. You have the job that everybody needs right now or wants to consult with. Alan, excitement of being in a metaverse museum is to embrace the decentralization of this new world. Okay, that's what we've really been talking about, which overturns the traditional power hierarchy of a museum. But for NFT artists and collectors, it comes to the critical question: who decides what's art, right? Who is really critiquing this? Museums like New York's famous Metropolitan Museum of Art are nonprofits which rely on public and private funding and donations for revenue. Ticket sales only account for about 4% of its revenue in the 2021 fiscal year. And for artists, they're gatekeepers, like curators, critics, and collectors that they have to navigate now. And these systems, Alan, you know more than anybody else as an artist, can be really frustrating, particularly to women artists or artists of color and minorities. What are your thoughts on this? And will the open metaverse allow for more inclusion?
Yeah, I think Web3 and metaverse is definitely going to change this. I mean, in the past, the traditional gallery and museum system is the ultimate gatekeeper, right? And that means perhaps some of the issues that you talk about, whether it is diversity, could be sacrificed. But I think what's interesting with Web3 is because you can go directly to your user, right? And you don't have to go through the middleman. So I think that clearly is going to change the dynamics. But I would say one more thing, which is I also think when you're creating on a metaverse, in the real world, I mean, there are artists that are anon, like Banksy, people still kind of don't know who he is, right? But in the metaverse, you can really be anyone you want to be, right? So you don't need to say you're a male or female artist, right? You don't need to declare who you are, right? So again, I think that frees up the degree of freedom to create. I really think the metaverse is for everyone, and I think we're going to see that change in arts.
Well said. You're right, and that's exactly right. It's you can be anybody you want in the metaverse, an iteration of the internet itself right now that we're looking at Web 3.0, but allowing for the creator economy to really flourish in an environment that has no race, no barrier, no ethnic, no financial restrictions, right? And when you look at all of these, especially Animoca, and you look at the gamers in that ecosystem, maybe $5 and $10 for you and I, Alan, it's not much. But when you're gaming and you're in the Philippines or Southeast Asia, that $5 a day that you're making in game, that you're converting to fiat currency because you have a smartphone, this is what I'm talking about paving the way out of poverty and about this creator economy giving rise to the people. And that's at the core of it all. So I think it all converges very nicely together. But we do need the regulators like Amy to keep us in check here. All right, guys.
And I think that's the sorry.
Go ahead. No, but I'd love for you to react.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the stories that we're hearing. And what one of the company we invested in is YGG, and a typical gamer in India, they would earn an extra $12, which really didn't sound like a lot until you find out that at the average age of Indian workers is $150. So there's almost 10%. So that's an extra meal, right? That's an extra outing. So I think for many people, Web3 and the ability to play and earn, is creating a big difference.
Yeah, very true. Amy, I have an interesting question. So we have 1.7 billion people in this world that are unbanked and or underbanked, okay? But they all have a smartphone. They all have a smartphone. They can all use that smartphone to even download these super fintech apps, be able to now be part of a banking system that they otherwise would not have been able to be part of in Web 1 or Web 2. So this is a very interesting proposition, and where you have a whole bunch of unbanked and underbanked people with almost no identity anyhow entering an anonymous space. How do you go about controlling that in terms of know your customer? Because now you actually don't know your customer.
Right. Yeah. So what you asked is an incredibly interesting problem when you're dealing with that from a regulatory perspective, right? Yeah. On the other hand, I think it's a great opportunity. For example, one of my first investments was in an African crypto exchange. And this is where many of the people that you mentioned, the underbanked people that don't have credit histories exist, right? And I think that in developing countries, there's a special opportunity because they're able to leapfrog directly into the metaverse, into this technology, and start building up an identity, a credit system. So oftentimes, you're seeing people being able to build up a credit history within games, build up credibility, build up a reputation, and you're starting to see companies take that information and port it into the real world via microloans. So via the metaverse, you're able to start developing a credit history and start developing your in real life track record and identity.
You just blew my mind. See, you taught me something I didn't know. And I pride myself on knowing a lot just because of the research I do. But these microloans, again, paving the way out of poverty, the creator economy. Alan, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because we've kind of seen that happening in China in the Web 2 world, where there are a lot of microloans, and these are these are catered to people that were unbanked, right? But with that, they actually were able to build up a credit score for themselves, which they were never able to get from the big banks, right? So it's super interesting to hear from Amy that it's that it's happening in the Web3 world as well, right? And I can imagine already there could be a soulbound token where the person would wrap his reputation and credit score in it,
exactly,
and that become the new identity, right? Isn't that interesting? And identity is not just about a name or passport or nationality, right? But it's kind of what you've done, right?
Yeah. Amy, feel free to bounce back there.
And just like, I mean, there's so many ideas could come out of this, just the show alone, but even beyond the banking system, right? You can imagine within a game, if you have a player that's built up a reputation and is, didn't have a single dollar to his name, received an airdrop, started playing the game, started building up an arsenal of tokens and NFTs, and now has credibility within the game. You can even see within a game, like an economy developing where other players will stake this player, and that's how this player is going to build up additional credit history within the game, right? And that's why going back to regulations is important, because if game platforms are then going to be facilitating the movement of these loans, and especially if they're going to be taking custody in the middle, then they should be aware of the licenses and the registrations that they need to do. But I mean, with the metaverse and blockchain, it's the ceiling is literally your imagination, and so that's what makes it super exciting.
Absolutely. So fantastic. Great conversations. I could go on and on, but I have to cap the time. I love talking. I mean, it's like almost like there's a big part of me that is just like a tech geek nerd that wants to hear more and more of this. So I maybe I'm the only one that's excited about my very segments, but I know for a fact that we have 12,000 listeners.
We're certainly excited.
that write in and love the edutainment received, because it's simplified to how it's really affecting real world issues and helping resolve real world issues. So thanks for coming on, guys. It was absolutely enlightening having you on.
Thank you again.
Guys, that was our Hello Open Metaverse, brought to you by Animoca Brands. Definitely check out the awesome Alan Lau, Chief Business Officer of Animoca. Head to animocabrands.com to get involved in all the action, of course, and check out the amazing Amy Madison, amymadison.xyz, or you could find her on Twitter and the gram at _Amy Madison. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeartRadio. We'll be right back after this.